Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rehman from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the ongoing Ukrainian crisis. Now, we have also learned that US is saying that there should be a boycott of Russia and G20, especially when you talk about the financial sector. There is a lot of development as far as the war is concerned. There are rumors, I would say rumors, that the Russians are preparing for a tactical nuclear strike. Now, if that is true, that could lead to something unimaginable. But having said that, the issue still remains the same. Last night I was watching CNN and I heard that there is a peace proposal given to the Ukrainian government by the Russians. So let's see what is in that and how will they move forward if it is accepted. Because at the end of the day, war is a problem. It is not a solution for any problem. And as also one of the founding members in the old American president, Benjamin Franklin, said that all wars are bad wars and no peace is bad peace. So at the end of the day, this is what we have learned. But having said that, where is it going to lead? There are a lot of ifs and buts. A lot of people do complain. There was a story, in fact, that said that the Turkish foreign minister has in fact mentioned that some NATO allies, some of the major NATO allies, they warned that this war should continue, and the longer the Ukrainian war is going to go on, more Russians will get exposed. And at the end of the day, according to Russia, around 10,000 of their soldiers, this is the Russian figure I'm giving you, they've been killed, many have been captured, many are also injured during this particular war. So the case is with the other side, which is Ukraine. A lot of civilians have been killed, a lot of soldiers have been killed, and many cities have been destroyed. But to talk about this, before I introduce you to our panelists, our production team has prepared a report. Let's watch that first.
The Russia and Ukraine crisis is affecting the world multidimensionally as it is pushing the world states towards a new Cold War, a lethal arms race, and an economic downfall. This crisis has strained the already complicated relations between the United States and China, as recently the United States Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin warned his Chinese counterpart General Xi Jinping regarding costs if China supports Russia militarily. Meanwhile, Russia successfully tested the Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile, which was boasted by President Vladimir Putin as a weapon which will make Moscow's enemies think twice. On the other hand, the head of the Russian state aerospace agency called the launch in northern Russia as a present to NATO. On the economic side, the International Monetary Fund in its latest World Economic Outlook report slashed its forecast for global economic growth by nearly a full percentage point, citing Russia's war in Ukraine, and declared inflation as a clear and present danger for many countries. The report warned that the reduced supply of oil, gas and metals produced by Russia and wheat and corn produced by both Russia and Ukraine will drive up prices sharply and will hurt lower-income households around the world. In the realm of war's direct effects on Russia and Ukraine and global spillovers, the IMF has now projected global growth of 3.6% in both 2022 and 2023, which is a drop of 0.8 and 0.2 percentage point, respectively, from its January forecast. In order to curtail these situations, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged the Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky if they would take meetings with him in their respective capitals. United Nations Secretary General spokesperson Stephanie Dujarric in this regard stated that these meetings will intend to discuss urgent steps to bring about peace in Ukraine and the future of multilateralism based on the Charter of the United Nations and international law.
Now to talk about this, we have with us in our studio on my right is Najm Saqib Saab. He's a former ambassador, senior diplomat. So a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. And we also have with us Air Commodore retired Basit Raza Abbasi Saab, who's a senior analyst. Sir, thank you so much for your time as well. And on Skype we have with us from Paris, France, Mr. Karel Vereycken. He's a political analyst. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and pleasure to have you in the show as well. If you allow me, let me put the first question to Mr. Karel.
By all means.
Mr. Karel, now, we have been hearing a lot that one story that is sort of a threat, sort of an alert for the entire Europe and perhaps for the entire globe, that most likely Russia could opt of using a tactical nuclear weapon A lot of analysts say that because the Russian forces are not they're not advancing at that level which they should have been at the moment. The time is not favoring them either. A lot of casualties as far as Russia is concerned, financial losses, military losses, and now since they are at a verge to take a decision, and this decision could lead to a tactical nuclear attack on one of the major cities of Ukraine. Your take, sir?
Well, my take is that we're in the middle of a very, very tough propaganda war. What should be taken into consideration is that the British Under Secretary of Armament, he said, well, if for example there would be a chemical attack in Ukraine, Britain could go for it alone. People should remember that during the invasion of Iraq, it was not following a vote of NATO. It was this so-called coalition of the willing. So the British are saying even if NATO doesn't want to go into a military intervention, we can go for it alone. And the way they want to do this is, first of all, make a lot of propaganda and pretend that there are weapons of mass destruction, like we have seen in Iraq, which were never existed, which were a pure invention to justify a foreign intervention. I fear that today we have a similar situation where, of course, Russia, if you're deploying your own troops in a war theater, once you use even a miniaturized nuclear weapon, you're completely disabling your own troops to operate in the war theater. So from the Russian side, it would be a complete destruction of their international reputation and honor, and secondly, it would not even help Russian troops on the ground to accomplish the missions they got. So I think this thing is the truth is always the first victim in war. So if you first have to accuse your adversary of being the enemy to justify that in fact it's yourself which are leading the situation. And as you said before, the NATO is mainly the UK and some crazy people in the State Department. They want to bleed Russia to death, So they want to prolong the war. They will do everything to prolong the war, to try to bankrupt Russia and to provoke so-called regime change, which will never happen in my sense. So the problem right now is that the Europeans, especially France and Germany, should find the courage to stand up and to tell the ugly truth and to break their submission to this Anglo-American establishment. That's my take.
All right. Now, Najm Saab, one important factor that is about the Russian objective, let's say about 2 months ago, whatever they had in their mind, they did it. They invaded Ukraine and they thought that they could take over Ukraine within a week or something of that sort. It's been over 8 weeks now, maybe more. And the ground reality is very different. I've also learned that the Russian troops, their morale is really getting low. About 6 of their generals have been killed in this war. So that means that if the Russians are claiming that around 10,000 soldiers have been killed, sir, that is a huge number. That's not a joke. And you're talking about a super military that is losing to that extent. A destroyer was sunk about a few days ago. According to reports, about 4 days ago, I had a word with one of our colleague who is working there, and he happens to be from TRT News. He said that around 700 tanks have been destroyed. I'm talking about the Russian tanks. A good number of jets, they have been shut down. So the case is with the attack helicopters. Now, if that is the reality, and there is a lot of support coming in from NATO forces, so that is giving a lot of encouragement to the Ukrainian forces, because it's not only the force which is fighting, the people are among them as well. So that means, sir, it's not a good news for the Russians.
War has never been a good news. The thing is that in any kind of war, and especially in such kind of full-blooded war, truth is the first casualty. But I see the Goebbels philosophy also working fully and completely. Both sides are claiming, certain victories and there are certain victors and vanquished. The fact remains, as Mr. Karel has very rightly pointed out, that Germany and France have to get up and then to call a spade a spade. But when this war started, we all knew what were the reasons of Russia going into Ukraine. The Ukrainians, asking the world, especially the West, United States and the Europe, to come and help. They never helped. They never went in, with full force, NATO, etc.
Boots on ground, basically.
We have seen everything. And then we saw, we heard this very bold statement from President Biden that unless Russia starts using chemical weapons, NATO forces and the West will not get into this actual war. Now, after this launching of this new, ballistic missile, Sarmat, it was in today's news that it has launched, Russia has launched, and saying, and Putin said it, with a tongue in cheek, that this Sarmat, missile will let the West think about certain things. Now, as you have also said that there are intentions, there are...
Is it a nuclear warhead carrier, sir?
Yes. And why now? Why now? In the middle of a full-fledged war. On the other hand, we see, as you mentioned, G20. The first session saw that when the Russian finance minister started speaking, everybody started leaving, especially Europe, France, Germany, UK, etc. But the good news in this G20 was that the IMF, managing director, it was said that even if there is a conflict, the cooperation, especially the financial cooperation, can go on. So what I saw there was a kind of dichotomy between the IMF, the real people, and the political side, which did not want to hear Russia, even after suspension of Russia in the Human Rights Council. This was the biggest, step that the West is taking against them. Yes, all right. You are telling Russia that you are not wanted. But what exactly are you planning to do with regard to this war? Are you actually going to, squeeze every bit of Ukraine? More than half of this country has already been destroyed. What are you waiting for? Second thing is that I see a war between, these social media and Twitters and this television screen wars. One is saying the deputation. For instance, that according to European Union, 500,000 Ukrainians have been deported to Russia, whereas Russia says that we have rescued about 140,000 Ukrainians into. Now, this is the tentacles are getting bigger and larger and varied.
These were the people living in Donetsk?
Yes.
And the other city also?
Yes. Now, what is actually happening, Donbass? What is actually happening, only God knows, because we can only watch television screens or read newspapers.
That's what you're hearing is through media, and media will talk about.
They have their own talking point. They have their own vested interest. But the fact remains that as a Pakistani diplomat, as a Pakistani citizen, I have to see. Number one, have all the Pakistanis, including those Pakistani students in Ukraine, have been evacuated? Yes, we have done that. Is our embassy in Kyiv functional? Yes, it is functional. Number two,
there's a limited staff or full-scale staff, sir?
No, same staff. We haven't called, recalled any of the, our ambassador is there. He's a Major General retired, General Noel Coker. Now, the other
Noel Coker, who was in NDU also.
Yes.
Was the same gentleman.
Same guy.
He was the head of ISRA, if I'm not wrong.
Yes. Right. He's the same guy. He is our new ambassador in Kyiv. Now, the other thing which is more worrisome for me as a Pakistani citizen is that the things that we used to import from Ukraine, especially wheat, What are we going to do with that? The other worrisome aspect is that the former Prime Minister, when he visited Moscow at that very crucial moment, the outcome of that visit in the context of Ukrainian war, is there anyone in the Foreign Office right now or in the Prime Minister House, the new regime, who is going to follow up on those things which were agreed upon in that visit? The good news is that we have a new MOS, Madam Hina Rabbani Khar, a very astute, politician, and she ran the Foreign Office as the Foreign Minister very nicely. Second thing is that Mr. Tariq Fatmi is back. Mr. Tariq Fatmi, a top diplomat of Pakistan,
he's been made the
who was also SCPM in Mr. Nawaz Sharif, and he has been made. Now these two guys, I hope, especially Tariq Fatmi, because he is a Russian specialist also. What I would like them to do is to assess the situation, and there are three angles to it which they need to immediately address as far as the Ukraine war is concerned. Number one, what should be our final stance on Russia's invasion into Ukraine? This is one. Number two, the economic aspect. How are we going to find alternate ways to go about this, import of wheat, for instance? Number three, how are we going to handle?
We earlier signed with Russia for 2 million tons.
Are we going to implement that?
Okay, now
that is why I said that they have to reassess the situation. A whole regime has been changed in Islamabad.
All right.
Number three is Pak-US relations in the context of Pakistan's relations with Russia, with particular reference to Prime Minister's, visit to Moscow during that time. And I'm hopeful that things will be saner now, and things will be, the chips will fall in place, and hopefully the people of Pakistan will get a proper policy about this aggression, about this invasion, in which we don't want to be party, by the way. But we don't want to tell them that we are so indifferent. Faisal, what if tomorrow Pakistan, God forbid, is attacked? You have to take, non-aligned movement is gone. There is no NAM, NAM, it doesn't exist. You have to take sides, but the trick is, how do you go about it taking sides?
I mean, that is $1 million question, and that is the actual art of diplomacy.
Yeah.
Sir, coming to you now, couple of obviously I would like you to continue with this particular point, but secondly, sir, the role of media. Other than RT, if you switch on any European channel, any American channel, it's CNN, it's Fox, it's BBC, it's Sky, it's Euro, it's French, it's any channel, or a German Deutsche Welle for that matter. Sir, very anti-Russian stance, very pro-Ukrainian stance. Totally different images which are shown on these channels. I am still reluctant to believe whether they are 100% right or wrong. What if Russia is telling you about the truth, and perhaps they are not exaggerating, or maybe they are exaggerating, the Western channels? So the media war, is the key now. What you show to people and to gain sympathy, and you change the perceptions, and that perception gains momentum, and then there is this, flow of decision-making process. I mean, so many decisions are immediately taken that, we need to provide these many arms or these many missiles, or we need to have this kind of a statement coming in from France or Germany for that matter. Your take, sir.
It has been repeated twice, and I don't want to do it for the third time. But in such situation, it's really very difficult to separate fact from fiction, because there's so much of propaganda going on that nobody knows what is the real truth. But there are few things which are confirmed, like the war has gone on for two months already.
As Ambassador Sahab said, in a war, truth is the first casualty. So that is the absolute truth.
That's a very old adage.
Yeah.
That's so true about all wars, and this kind of war where so many nations are involved directly or indirectly in it. Having said that, what is obvious is that in 2 months, Russians have not really achieved their main objective.
And their main objective
was to deter, to sort of get hold of Kiev and sort of install a regime of their choice, so that like they can make it another Belarus. They have not been able to do it. Now their objective, they have really curtailed back on their basic objective, and now they seem to be more intent on sort of forming a continuous new border for them, in which the east of Ukraine plus the south of Ukraine, including Crimea, is annexed with Russia. And maybe they have already declared it as a republic. So these republics, which will actually be ruled by people more a sort of Russian-oriented leadership there. So this seems to be the objective at the moment. So and that is quite achievable, because Mariupol it's predicted that it's about to fall, although they have put up real fierce fight. That city has been totally destroyed.
Absolutely.
And still they are hiding somewhere in their steel mill and their trenches and the underground facilities, and continuing the war despite of not having an air force operative to provide them any sort of cover. So all these realities are also visible to us. So now we are at a stage when there is a good chance for a peace to take place, and to do that, both sides of the war have to sort of get back from their original.
So you're talking about peace. What about the proposal given by the Russians to the Ukrainians? And they said, well, there's a peace proposal now.
There's a sort of great, I say, red lines, because the Ukrainian president has repeatedly said, Mr. Zelensky, that we can't trade our land. So if you don't trade your land, if you don't let...
The Russians already have Crimea, and they have got control of so many other eastern areas as well as the southern areas, much beyond Crimea.
Yeah. As far as Crimea is concerned, they had willy-nilly tolerated it. They were living with it. But it's the new sort of incursion of Russia and Russian-backed forces into the east of Ukraine, the Donbas region, Donetsk and these kind of areas, where now the Russian forces are advancing, and they are sort of trying to create a more secure border for these states, republics which they have announced. So this is what is going on, and it's in the near future. I feel that the Americans and their NATO allies, some of them, Britain is leading in that, they want this war to continue, because without actually getting into the war, they are sort of bleeding Russians white. They want to do that. And at the moment, Russian losses are heavy, as you have pointed out. And to some extent, the prestige of a world power, the myth of a world power is also impacted. So these are the realities. And what is the actual outcome will perhaps be known after a little while. But having seen all these things and its impact on the world situation, we know that the food inflation is rising, the inflation in general is rising because of the cost of
all over the globe,
all these products. So the poverty in the world over, the global poverty is on the rise, because Russia and Ukraine, Russia is the main commodity supplier, be it oil, coal, gas, aluminum, and so many other metals.
Even wheat, for that matter.
The wheat and oilseed, Ukraine and Russia are major suppliers. So for the poor people who have limited income, if they have to buy their food and it's becoming more expensive, they have very little money left for their education of their children.
Especially and for the food importing countries.
So there is a crisis which is affecting all the nations, and more so the nations which are not developed so well, like our own country. So these are the challenges we have to brace for, and as Ambassador has just pointed out, we have a very little room for maneuver, because between these joints we don't want to be crushed. So we want to have a policy which is in many ways fair and based on something very serious, by which we can sort of hold on to our principle, so that in case of future conflicts, when we are affected by it, we can also say that in this situation this was our stance.
Correct.
Because that becomes a sort of template on which you are judged. And if you have been sitting on the fence in such a thing, then you can't ask for help from when you are yourself in that desperate situation. So our policy makers, our foreign policy architects I'm sure they are working overtime and they are trying to find a way out of this very difficult situation.
Let's see. This is again a very important point raised by you. Now coming to you, Mr. Karel, couple of developments. There was a story that the Americans have sent aid worth around $800 million. That is totally military aid that they have sent. Secondly, they plan to increase it to, or rather they have already done it to $2.5 billion. The British forces are also supporting, not practically, but obviously the American forces and the British forces, they are also training the Ukrainian military. Then the American says that the war is going to continue and we'll keep on supporting the Ukrainian people and the public and the government and Mr. Zelensky in general. Now, if that is the case, that means that the Russians are not backing out. The war is going to prolong. It is going to prolong, let's say, for another couple of months. You're talking about more people dying. You're talking about more lethal weapons being used. Perhaps some sanctions or maybe more sanctions on the Russians, but they will not affect them immediately. Remember that. That is going to take time. Now, in such, in such circumstances where there is a superpower, a military superpower on one side, Europe on the other, sir. Let's suppose if Mr. Vladimir Putin gets really frustrated, and this war is not only limited to, let's say, Ukraine, perhaps countries like Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, or some other European countries which are very close to as allies to the NATO, perhaps they could be under some sort of a threat. And that means absolute disaster in Europe, sir.
Well, I think there's a little confusion about the real objectives of Russia in this military operation. The objectives are not to occupy Ukraine or install a crony state or a fake or a government which is completely obedient to Moscow. That's not the objective. The objective is first is to protect the people of Donbass, which has been shelled intensively since February 17. There was a 50% increase of shelling, which triggered the intervention of Russia. The second point is to destroy the military equipment in Ukraine. In the same way, the United States didn't want Cuba to have nuclear weapons or missiles in its backyard. And the third point is the denazification of all these brigades, like the Azov brigades, which have been incorporated since 2014 into the Ukrainian army, because in reality they didn't really have an army at that point. So now these two, most of the military equipment of Ukraine is now destroyed. There are still some pockets of the Azov brigades under the Azovstal steel plant, but basically Mariupol has fallen to Russia, and it would be now what Putin was expecting was not so much the fall of Kiev, but was an opening up from the American side to start negotiating on the strategic interests of Russia, which is the control of armament, the end of the extension of NATO to the Russian borders, and to have a neutral state, maybe with the Europeans, eventually China, the US, and Russia, guaranteeing the security of Ukraine as a neutral state on the model of Austria. Now, all these things, which all the diplomats of the world know that this is the way out, and basically the Anglo-Americans, they don't want peace, they don't want to have this thing solved. And now Putin is going to a plan B, because he wants a victory before May 9th, which is the celebration of Russia's victory against Nazism. So my take is that he will concentrate on the south. I mean, the troops have been moving out of northern Ukraine and western Ukraine. They will concentrate on the Donbass. And unfortunately, if there is no sign from the west really take care of the interests of Russia and Ukraine, we're going towards a partition, a division of North and South, where the Russians will probably stay a while in the Donbass to securitize the zone, and but I think there is a good potential to turn the tables if we can wake enough people in the West to come to their senses. And especially, I saw it very interesting, the shift from China, but also Indonesia. Indonesia maintains its invitation of Putin to the summit, the G20 summit, which will take place in Bali in mid-November. And under big pressure, so far they say we want Russia to participate, because without Russia there is no solution to many problems in the world. So we cannot outsource Russia to another planet. We will have to learn how to talk to them, how to work with them, and to listen to them. That's the job of diplomacy. But this means stopping these geopolitical games, which are bringing us into very dangerous waters of military confrontation.
Now, Mr. Karel, a lot of Americans, rather, there was a certain percentage, I'm not sure exactly what it was around, somewhere around 60 to 70%. They believe that Mr. Biden is not taking very stiff actions against Russia. Perhaps their response is not tough enough. This is what they think. Tell us about that, and also, what about the meeting between the Russian President Mr. Vladimir Putin and the French President Mr. Macron? Obviously, there are elections going on as well in France, but still, do you think Mr. Macron is making sense, or what is exactly going on?
Mr. Macron is a very double figure because he knows most of the things I said before, but he doesn't want to break with the arrangement in the EU and with the Americans. And on the other side, he knows that the world is on fire. So we should support him when he talks to Putin, but at the same time we should harass him and push him to really stand up to the pressure. You know, look what Ukraine did with Steinmeier. You know, they didn't even want to receive him because Steinmeier knows very well that Zelensky, they betrayed all the Minsk agreements. They were never applied in Ukraine. So it's a dog and pony show, which becomes very dangerous. And at one point, the fact that this Russian ship was, you know, the way they got this Russian ship was by sending drones and confusing the radar system so that the whole thing could be hit from another side with the radar system the other way around. And now who is operating drones on the Black Sea, you know? So at one point there will be an accident, and the Russians, for the moment, the Russians are very cool because they know what happened, and they don't react like on a chessboard. So there is some hope that people can talk and work out a solution.
Mr. Karel, you're breaking up, but we got your point. Now, coming to you, sir. Now, there is a lot of advancement when you talk about the southern Ukraine and the eastern. Good enough, sir. A lot of resistance in other major cities, Kiev for that matter, sir. And earlier, there were reports that the kind of obstacles that been in place when it comes to especially the tanks and the APCs coming into the city, sir. To me, it's more or less like, let's say, a one situation, sir. If I'm not wrong, please correct me. Because it seems now the guerrilla warfare and with little weapons like the Javelin or the anti-tank missiles for that matter, and good quality, obviously if they are being given by the Americans or the British in particular, sir. So that is going to continue. That can continue. Obviously, the cities are destroyed. I mean, all you need is food and weapons. That's it to fight, sir.
A couple of things before I, address your question.
Like, I'm talking about the street fight now,
Yes,
sir.
yes. Look, in any war,
Military is not trained
at
for
the
that.
end of the war, you cannot decide who was right. You can only see what has been left. This is one. Number two, to say that the Russian objectives were ABC, as our distinguished colleague from France, Mr. Karel, has said that there were three objectives. A couple of them have been, highlighted by my colleague here, the Air Commodore. I think if you ask somebody who would say that the major reason of Russia attacking Ukraine was in anticipation of Ukraine's membership to
NATO.
For NATO. Now, international relations is not mathematics. You can't say that these are the objectives, and this is why. And neither Vladimir Putin had come on television screen or had a press conference stating that the following are my objectives. A, B, C, D,
Nobody
E, F.
discloses them.
Nobody discloses that. So these are just, you can guess about it, and you can see if your guess is corroborated by the facts on ground, and if it is, if it can be substantiated by the actions of the parties. Now, having said that, you can start a war, anytime, Faisal, but it is not up to you to stop it.
Correct.
Now, if you ask me, if I am Vladimir Putin and I have to stop this war, I will have to think 1,000 times before I do that, because I'm
Your reputation is at stake.
Too much committed, yes. This was one of the reasons that was quoted, the moment Russia invaded Ukraine, that Russia wanted to become the old Soviet Union. It wanted to declare, ring the bells, that I exist, that we are the former superpower, and we still hold some power and potential to see how this world has to be run. Now, all these objectives are on one side, and the other hand, we see that humanity is being crushed. And the champions of human rights and the champions of democracy and all that, they are just watching, calculating pros and cons, and the people who can actually do something, and mind you...
And do what, sir? Let's suppose America decides to attack. I mean, what will they do?
No, if you ask me, if I am, the Secretary of State in Washington, and you ask me, Mr. Anthony Blinken, do you have a solution to this? Yes. Today, if I announce that Ukraine will not be a part of NATO, we will not accept NATO.
Even the Ukrainian president even says the same.
No.
He says, okay, we can delay that, or we will not.
No.
This is one of the major demands of the Russians.
It has to be said unequivocally. It has to be said clearly, and there has to be some actions, to show that what you are saying, you mean that. There were many ways and manners in which this war could have been stopped. There are still many ways. Even before, during, and after any war, diplomacy can work. But the point here is that the Western countries, especially those who matter, in this particular scene, or for that matter in any world affairs, they are not interested in stopping this war.
Right.
If your enemy is being destroyed on another front, and your national interest and your own borders are secured, why would I care?
This is exactly what is happening then.
Why would I care? Now, this is very obvious. But to tell this, to say this truth or to call a spade to Washington or France or Germany, it's very difficult. The world has already been divided into blocks. Not that people are not, people want this war to continue and they are with Russia and all that. No, nobody wants war. And especially the developing countries, they can't afford it. a country like my country, Pakistan. The point is that unless there are two, possibilities, Faisal, that this war can, dissipate or stop or, one is that either of the two, either Russia or the West as a whole and Europe as a whole, one of them has to blink. One of them has to blink and see the reality and forget about this, egoism and showing the world that,
ego is the problem.
That we are the best. But the only possibility the only option that we have in developing world is to wait and see and pray. And pray that this does not, go beyond Europe. It does not go beyond to, because if this...
Just tell me one thing, sir. Do you think it has the potential to go into Europe, sir?
My dear Faisal,
because I'll just put a little question and then over to you here, because there was a story that Finland, which is totally dependent as far as energy is concerned on Russia, and Sweden. What if they join hands with the NATO? So what sort of a signal is that going to be?
All of us know the nitty-gritties and, the rigmarole situation of the World War II. As I said, that you can start a war, but you cannot...
It's beyond your control then.
It's beyond your control. And it can turn into any monster that the world, even Russia and America...
World War I, World War II, great examples.
But so far, I think the major powers, they are cognizant of this fact that if this Sarmat missile has been shown yesterday, it means something. And they are waiting for Russia to actually use chemical weapons or do something drastic that they won't be able to stop, and then the war starts. And when that kind of war starts, then everybody is involved in it.
Now, sir, the question is, nobody denies the ability of the Russians to strike the kind of military arsenal that they have, military power that they have enjoyed in the past. I mean, the only country which used to challenge the Americans was Soviet Union, and even now, Russia. Now, sir, number one, do you think in this particular war, the Russians have been exposed, I'm also quoting the Western media, that the kind of desired results they wanted to achieve, they haven't been able to do so, despite that almost 8-9 weeks have passed. Look at their number of casualties, the destruction on their part, and now they're telling the world, see, this is what we have. And then there is another school of thought, sir, which I also believe in, is that the Russians primarily built their weapons during the Cold War era. And big bombs, long-range missiles, they had the great rocket technology which was far superior than the Americans at that time, if I'm not wrong.
Correct.
And even Tesla, the owner of Tesla, went to Russia to get some, or rather acquire some missile technology, but it was pretty expensive, so he decided to build on his own. But what I'm saying is that old bombs, which used to destroy the entire cities, Tsar Bomba for that matter, and so on and so forth, the practical weapons which are required in today's world, the jets, the kind of technology which the Americans have, they exactly know where to use, how to use, what to use, and how much to use. We have seen that. I mean, absolute destruction means absolute destruction. But over here, sir, I mean, it's more about destruction, just destruction, and the objectives are still at the back burner.
This is right. Actually, Russia's strength is its strategic weapons. And in such case, this is more of a conventional war which is taking place.
Correct.
And Russia doesn't have a strength in this, that kind of strength which the NATO and other countries have. So this is very obvious that they, talking of the intent of Mr.
Sir, in guerrilla warfare, you do not even know about the streets, about the cities, about the...
If we look at the complete range of the war which has taken place, I think it was wrong to start the war at this stage, because you talked of the destruction of the tank. I think he was inviting for the destruction of those tanks, because in Ukraine, in the winter, the snow is firm, the ice, the tanks can roll over it. But as the spring, it enters into spring,
mud.
That becomes mud. So he delayed, when the 24th February was the date that they invaded. That is the time when the snow starts becoming soft. And we saw it from our own eyes that the Russian tanks were running on the roads. In war, in the tactical situation, the tanks are not running on the roads.
So vulnerable.
They become vulnerable because those guys hiding in the bushes with javelin missiles, they would knock them one by one, very easy target.
And that's what they have done.
And this is what has happened.
Instead, they burned the Russian soldiers inside their tanks.
Exactly. And talking of the intent, if they didn't want to sort of install a pro-Russian regime, what were the Russian troops doing in the proximity of Kiev, from which they had to unceremoniously depart? So these are the things from which you judge the intents. And unfortunately, as the things have revealed, probably some of the objectives. Now, Mr. Putin is one person who keeps all the cards to his chest. It's very difficult to guess his intent because he speaks very little, and there is very little which he sort of pronounces.
He means business.
So that's right.
He's a straightforward guy. Imagine if somebody is a black belt, head of KGB, who's been the president, the prime minister, has served in the military, has done some marvelous, work. In fact, so for us, he has that aura also.
That's right. But for us, from these indicators, we sort of draw conclusions about his intents. They're not so overt. They're not so obvious. So I feel that, as you just pointed out, now if the objective was to deter Ukraine from joining NATO, this was not the objective. The objective was to deter any country abetting Russia from joining NATO. And if that was the objective, it has not been achieved because
maybe he wants to talk from a position of strength. Let's destroy Ukraine and then we'll talk to them.
But Finland and Sweden, we say Finlandization. When we talk of a country becoming neutral, we said it is being Finlandized.
Yeah.
It is such a neutral country.
Yeah.
And they are saying that we want to join.
The last 15 seconds, because I was told about a minute ago to wrap it up.
I was just thinking about, this has been a very interesting, discussion. Thank you very much, Faisal. I was just thinking that there are some lessons to learn so far as far as the Ukraine. Number one is that never compromise on your nukes, because Ukraine did, and it is now, repenting. Second thing,
it could have been a good deterrent?
Oh, of course. Number two is that your national interest remains supreme, even if the whole Europe watching Ukraine being destroyed. You will wait until your borders are. Third thing is that might is right. Might is always right. And the fourth and very interesting one that I conclude is that a pandemic called Corona goes away when a European country like Ukraine is Ukrained. Suddenly, the pandemic vanishes.
Everybody's accepted without the mask. I fail to understand what was going on. But, sometimes I feel that maybe Vladimir Putin, who happens to be a very strong person, is not taking Volodymyr Zelensky seriously, because he looks upon him perhaps as a stand-up comedian who is acting like a war hero now. So anyway, that's a long debate. But anyway, sir, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Basit, it was a pleasure having you, and thank you so much, Mr. Karel, for your presence as well, sir. Once again, so kind of you to join our program. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you tomorrow, or rather on Monday. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.